I agreed to go camping with my best friend Richard because I needed a break from everything. That's the excuse I gave myself, anyway. The real reason was a little harder to admit. I was hopelessly into him. Not in some stupid little crush way either. I mean the kind that sneaks up on you after years of friendship until one random moment changes everything. One second you're laughing over beers with your best friend, and the next you're noticing the way his forearms flex when he drives or how his voice gets softer when he's tired. And once you notice it, you're screwed. Richard and I had known each other since freshman year of college. We met because he accidentally spilled coffee all over my laptop in the library and then spent 2 weeks apologizing by buying me food. Somehow that turned into 4 years of friendship. Now we were both 25, living in the same city, working soul-crushing jobs, and pretending adulthood wasn't exhausting us. Richard worked construction management, which somehow made him even more unfairly attractive. He was tall, broad-shouldered, constantly tanned from being outside, and had this rough, sleepy voice that made every sentence sound intimate even when he was talking about gas station snacks. Meanwhile, I worked remotely doing graphic design and spent most days staring at screens in sweatpants. Opposites somehow worked for us. "You seriously packed 3 hoodies?" Richard asked, staring into the back seat of my car. "It's called being prepared. It's called being dramatic, Noel." I flipped him off while shoving another bag into the trunk. He laughed and leaned against the car, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. Even at 7 in the morning he looked annoyingly good. Gray t-shirt stretched across his chest, backwards cap, hiking boots. I hated how much my brain noticed these things. "You ready?" he asked. "Depends. Are you gonna complain the whole hike again? That happened one time. You cried about mosquitoes for 2 hours. They were aggressive." I snorted and climbed into the driver's seat. The campsite Richard picked was supposedly remote and peaceful, which usually translated to no phone signal and at least one near-death experience involving nature. The drive took almost 4 hours. Most of it was easy conversation. Music playing quietly while we joked around like we always did. Richard talked about problems at work. I complained about clients. Somewhere along the highway he stole my iced coffee and denied it while literally drinking it. Normal stuff. But there were moments too. Small moments that stuck with me longer than they should have. Like when he rested his hand on my thigh for half a second after I almost missed an exit. Or when I caught him staring at me while I was talking and he looked away too slowly. Maybe I imagined it. I usually try not to think about those moments too much because it never ended well for me. Richard was straight. At least as far as I knew. He dated girls constantly. Casual flings mostly. He'd show me pictures sometimes and ask what shirt looked better before dates. Meanwhile, I sat there pretending my chest didn't feel weird hearing about it. Pathetic, honestly. By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was already lower in the sky. The place was gorgeous though. Tall pine trees surrounded a small lake that reflected orange evening light across the water. It felt completely isolated, quiet except for wind moving through the trees. Richard stretched beside the car and let out a low whistle. "Okay," he said. "This might actually save my mental health. You say that every trip." "Yeah, but this time I mean it." We unloaded gear and started setting up camp. Or more accurately, I set up camp while Richard somehow made everything harder. "You're holding the poles backwards." "No, I'm not." "You literally are." He stared at the tent pieces for a second. "Oh." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the stakes. "Don't start," he warned, grinning despite himself. "I'm absolutely starting." By the time the tent was finally up, it was getting cold. We made a fire, cooked cheap hot dogs over it, and sat near the lake drinking beer while darkness slowly settled around us. This was always my favorite part. Just existing with him away from everything else. No distractions. No work. No people. Just Richard. The firelight made him look softer somehow. Shadows flickering across his face while he leaned back against the log behind him. "You ever think about disappearing out here permanently?" he asked suddenly. "What, become forest people?" Exactly. You would die within 3 days. That's insulting. You almost passed out because a bee chased you. That bee wanted me dead. I laughed into my beer. Richard watched me for a second with this weird little smile. What? Nothing. You're staring. Can I admire my best friend? The words hit harder than they should have. I looked away first. Shut up. He laughed quietly, but something about the moment lingered after. The fire cracked softly between us. Then Richard stood up suddenly. Hold on, he muttered. I forgot something in the car. I nodded, watching him disappear into the darkness. A few minutes later I heard him swear loudly. You good? I called. No. That sounds promising. He came back holding his sleeping bag with an expression that instantly made me nervous. What happened? My zipper's completely broken. I blinked. What? He held it up helplessly. The zipper had split almost entirely down the side. You're kidding. I wish. I stared at him. The temperature was already dropping fast. Do you have extra blankets? Nope. Seriously? I thought I had a functioning sleeping bag, Noel. I rubbed my face. Of course this would happen. Richard looked genuinely frustrated now, running a hand through his messy hair. I can sleep by the fire or something. You'll freeze. I'll survive. No, you won't, drama queen. He smirked slightly. Learn from you. I sighed and looked toward the tent. My sleeping bag was oversized. Technically meant for colder weather. Technically big enough for 2 people. Technically the worst possible situation for my sanity. Richard followed my gaze. Then he looked back at me slowly. Oh. The air suddenly felt different. We could just share mine, I said casually. Way too casually. It's big enough. Richard hesitated. You sure? Yeah. Another pause. His eyes stayed on mine a second longer than normal. Then he nodded slowly. Okay. And just like that, my entire weekend became dangerous. I tried to act normal after that. Really. But it's hard to act normal when you know you're about to spend the entire night pressed against the guy you've secretly wanted for years. Richard didn't seem nearly as affected. At least not outwardly. He just tossed another piece of wood onto the fire and sat back down beside me like we hadn't just agreed to share a sleeping bag in a tiny 2-person tent. Meanwhile, my brain was melting. You're weirdly quiet, he said after a while. I'm tired. Liar. I glanced over. Richard was watching me with that lazy little smirk he always wore when he thought he was figuring me out. You overthink literally everything, he continued. Not everything. Noel, you once spent 20 minutes deciding between 2 identical sandwiches. They were different breads. He laughed under his breath. God, I loved that sound. I stared into the fire so he wouldn't notice the way my face warmed. The problem with Richard was that being around him always felt easy until moments like this happened. Moments where I became painfully aware of every glance, every touch, every shift in his voice. And tonight already felt different. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the cold. Or maybe I was finally losing my mind. Eventually the temperature dropped enough that neither of us could ignore it anymore. Richard rubbed his hands together and stood. All right, he said. I'm freezing my ass off. Language? Grandpa. We cleaned up camp together under the glow of lantern light. The entire time I could feel this strange tension sitting between us. Not awkward exactly. Just charged. At one point Richard brushed past me while carrying the cooler, his hand settling briefly on my waist to move around me. It lasted maybe 1 second. Still enough to make my stomach tighten. Inside the tent, things somehow became even worse. Or better. Depending on how emotionally self-destructive you considered me. The tent was small enough that every movement felt exaggerated. I busied myself unrolling the sleeping bag while Richard changed nearby. Dude, I said quickly, keeping my eyes firmly on the floor. At least pretend to have shame. I'm wearing shorts? That's not the point. You've seen me shirtless before. Yeah. Way too many times. That didn't mean I handled it well. I finally glanced up and immediately regretted it. Richard was pulling a hoodie over his head, chest still partially exposed, abs disappearing beneath fabric as he tugged it down. He caught me looking. I looked away instantly. A quiet pause followed. Then Richard spoke carefully. You okay? Yeah. You sure? Why wouldn't I be? Another pause. Then softly. You've been acting weird tonight. My heartbeat kicked harder. I'm not acting weird. You kinda are. I sat down inside the sleeping bag too quickly. Well, maybe I'm tired of hearing you complain. Richard laughed quietly. There you are. He climbed into the sleeping bag beside me a second later. And immediately everything became painfully real. The space was tight. Not impossibly tight, but close enough that our legs brushed instantly. I could feel warmth radiating off him through our clothes. The zipper closed. Now there was nowhere to go. Richard shifted beside me with a quiet groan. Jesus! What? This is close. You're the one who broke your sleeping bag. I know. His shoulder pressed lightly against mine. Neither of us moved away. Outside, wind moved softly through the trees. The tent fabric fluttered faintly while moonlight filtered dimly through the material above us. Richard let out a slow breath. At least you're warm. I swallowed. Yeah. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable silence. Just heavy. I became hyper-aware of everything. The smell of smoke lingering on his clothes. The rough warmth of his arm against mine. His breathing. God, especially his breathing. I tried focusing on literally anything else. So, Richard said quietly after a minute, you ever think about relationships? The question caught me off guard. What? Like serious ones? I frowned slightly in the darkness. Where's this coming from? I don't know. He shifted onto his side slightly to face me. Just thinking. You? Thinking? Dangerous. Answer the question. I hesitated. Yeah, I admitted. Sometimes. You ever been close? The way he asked felt strangely careful. I stared at the ceiling of the tent. Not really. That surprises me. Why? I don't know. His voice lowered slightly. You're easy to care about. My chest tightened painfully. Richard said affectionate things sometimes. That wasn't new. But this felt different somehow. More intimate. You drunk? I muttered. He laughed softly. Maybe a little. Silence again. Then, you ever wonder what it'd be like if things were different? I frowned slightly. Different how? Another pause. Longer this time. Then Richard exhaled quietly. Never mind. My pulse was suddenly impossible to ignore. The darkness made everything worse because I couldn't fully read him. Couldn't tell if I was imagining things. Couldn't tell if this meant anything at all. Richard shifted again. This time closer. His knee slid lightly against mine beneath the sleeping bag. Neither of us moved away. You know what's funny? He murmured. What? I trust you more than anybody. The honesty in his voice hit me hard. I turned my head slightly toward him. Even in the darkness I could make out the shape of his face only inches away now. You're my best friend, I said quietly. Yeah. But the way he said it sounded complicated. My heart wouldn't slow down. Richard's gaze stayed on me. Then slowly, carefully, he reached up and adjusted the hood of my sweatshirt near my neck. Such a tiny gesture. Still intimate enough to wreck me. You're freezing, he said softly. I'm fine. You're shivering. Maybe from the cold. Mostly not. His hand lingered for half a second near my shoulder before pulling away. But the warmth stayed. I should have gone to sleep. Instead, I stayed there staring at him in the dark while tension stretched tighter between us with every passing second. And then the rain started. Hard. The sudden sound crashing against the tent made both of us jump slightly. Well, Richard muttered. That's not terrifying at all. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. The temperature dropped even more. Without really thinking, Richard moved closer instinctively. Now his chest was pressed lightly against my arm. His leg tangled partly with mine beneath the sleeping bag. Neither of us acknowledged it. Another crack of thunder echoed outside. Richard let out a quiet breath beside me. This is kinda nice, he admitted softly. I turned toward him slightly. Being trapped in a tent during a storm? Being here with you. Everything in me stopped. Richard seemed to realize how that sounded immediately after saying it. But he didn't take it back. Didn't joke. Didn't look away. He just stayed there close enough that I could feel his breath against my face while rain hammered around us. And for the first time in 4 years, I started wondering if maybe I wasn't the only one feeling something here. I barely slept. Not because of the storm. Because Richard stayed close to me the entire night. At some point after the rain started, he shifted even nearer in his sleep until his arm ended up across my waist. And maybe I should have moved it. Maybe a smarter person would have. Instead, I stayed completely still, staring into darkness while my best friend unconsciously held me against his chest. It was torture. Warm, confusing torture. Every time thunder shook the tent, Richard would tighten his grip slightly without waking up. His face was close enough that I could feel his breath against the back of my neck. I kept telling myself it didn't mean anything. People cuddled in their sleep sometimes. Especially in cold weather. Especially while sharing a sleeping bag. Still didn't explain why my heart felt like it was trying to kill me. Sometime near morning I finally drifted off. When I woke up again, sunlight was filtering softly through the tent. And Richard was still wrapped around me. Except now he was awake. I realized it the second I felt his fingers flex slightly against my stomach. My entire body tensed. Neither of us moved. For a few quiet seconds we just stayed there, breathing in the same tiny space. Then Richard spoke softly behind me. You're warm. My throat felt dry instantly. Thanks? His quiet laugh vibrated against my back. God. This is probably weird, huh? He murmured. A little. Sorry. But he didn't move away. Honestly, neither did I. I should have. Instead, I stayed there, letting myself enjoy it for one selfish second longer than I should have. Then Richard finally loosened his arm and rolled onto his back with a groan. Well, he muttered. That storm was insane. I sat up too quickly. Yeah. Smooth, Noel. Real subtle. Richard watched me rub my face, amusement flickering across his expression. You okay over there? Fantastic. You look panicked. I always look panicked. True. I threw a pillow at him. He laughed and caught it easily. The normalness of the moment somehow made everything worse. Because now I didn't know if last night mattered to him at all. Maybe for him it was just sharing warmth during a storm. Meanwhile, I practically had a religious experience over being held for 6 hours. Pathetic. We climbed out of the tent into cold morning air. The campsite looked completely soaked from the storm. Water dripped from tree branches while fog hovered lightly over the lake. Richard stretched beside me, hoodie riding up enough to expose part of his stomach. I looked away instantly. Dangerous habit. You making coffee? He asked. Need it to survive. You're so dramatic in the morning. You're dramatic all the time. Fair. He bumped his shoulder lightly against mine while passing by toward the cooler. That tiny touch lingered in my chest way longer than it should have. The morning felt strangely domestic after that. We made coffee together, cooked eggs over the fire, sat quietly watching the lake wake up around us. And somehow the quiet between us didn't feel awkward anymore. If anything, it felt softer. At one point, Richard handed me a mug and our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. His eyes lifted to mine. Something unreadable passed across his face. Then he cleared his throat and looked toward the lake instead. So, he said casually, you want to hike after breakfast? I nodded too quickly. Yeah. Anything to stop thinking. The trail around the lake was narrow and muddy from the storm. Richard walked ahead most of the time, occasionally reaching back to help me over slippery spots even though I absolutely did not need help. "You know I'm capable of walking on my own, right?" I asked after he grabbed my wrist for like the 5th time. "You almost ate shit 20 minutes ago." "One time." "You flailed." "I slipped." "You screamed." "I did not scream." Richard grinned over his shoulder. "It was a little scream." I shoved him lightly. He grabbed my arm dramatically. "Violence? You deserved it." He laughed again. The sound echoed through the trees while sunlight filtered between branches around us. And for a second everything felt painfully perfect. Until Richard slipped. It happened fast. One second he was stepping over a wet rock near the water. The next his foot slid completely out from under him. Shit! I barely caught his arm before he went down. But the momentum pulled both of us sideways. We crashed hard into the muddy ground together. Richard landed partly on top of me with a grunt. For one stunned second neither of us moved. Then we both started laughing. "Nice save," he muttered breathlessly. "You're welcome." Except now he was hovering over me. One arm braced beside my head. Chest pressed partly against mine. Way too close. The laughter slowly faded. Richard looked down at me differently suddenly. His smile softened. And neither of us moved away. My heartbeat became painfully loud. I could feel his breath. Feel the weight of him against me. Something shifted in his expression then. Something nervous. His eyes flicked briefly to my mouth. My entire body froze. Was this happening? Was he? A branch cracked loudly somewhere nearby. Richard pulled back instantly like he'd been shocked. "Jesus!" he muttered, standing quickly. I sat up slower, trying to steady my breathing. Probably just an animal. But the moment was gone now. Richard rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "We should keep moving." "Yeah." The rest of the hike felt different. Not bad. Just tense in a way either of us knew how to address. Richard kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. I caught him every time. By afternoon we headed back to camp exhausted and muddy. Richard stripped off his wet hoodie near the fire without thinking. I immediately looked away. Too late. "You know," he said casually behind me. "For somebody who claims not to stare, you stare a lot." I nearly choked on my water. "I do not." "You absolutely do." I literally looked away. After. Heat crawled up my neck. Richard laughed quietly. Then after a small pause he added softer. "I don't mind." That hit me directly in the chest. I turned slowly. Richard was watching me carefully now. No teasing. No smirk. Just watching. The air between us suddenly felt too heavy again. "What's going on with you lately?" I asked quietly before I could stop myself. Richard blinked slightly. "What do you mean?" "You've been acting different." He held my gaze for a long second. Then looked down at the fire. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. That honesty somehow felt more dangerous than anything else. Either of us spoke for a moment. The crackling fire filled the silence between us. Then Richard looked back at me slowly. And softly, almost uncertainly, he asked, "If I told you something, could it stay between us?" My stomach tightened immediately. Richard almost never sounded nervous. But right now, sitting across from me beside the fire, shoulders tense, eyes fixed somewhere near the flames instead of me, he looked genuinely unsettled. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Of course." He nodded once like he was preparing himself. Then he grabbed another beer from the cooler, opened it, and took a long drink before speaking again. "I think something's wrong with me." I frowned instantly. "What? Why would you say that?" Richard laughed softly under his breath, but there was no humor in it. "Because I've been losing my mind for like 2 months. Every nerve in my body suddenly felt awake." "What do you mean?" He looked at me finally. And the expression on his face made my chest tighten. "I don't know what's happening to me lately, Noel. His voice was quieter now. Things feel different. I stayed completely still. Richard rubbed the back of his neck roughly. At first I thought it was stress or something. Work's been hell. I haven't really been sleeping. But then it kept getting worse. Worse how? He hesitated. Then laughed once under his breath. You're really gonna make me say it? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. The way he said it made heat crawl instantly up my spine. Neither of us moved. The fire cracked softly between us. Richard looked down at the beer in his hands. I keep thinking about you. My heartbeat stopped. Actually stopped. What? He exhaled hard through his nose. There. I said it. The world suddenly felt very small. Richard still wouldn't fully look at me. I don't know why, he continued quietly. And before you freak out, I know how this sounds. I couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. I mean, he swallowed. You're my best friend. Obviously I care about you. But this is different. His voice lowered slightly. Lately when you're around, I feel insane. Every word hit directly into my chest. I stared at him completely frozen. Richard laughed nervously again. Say something. You. My voice cracked immediately. You're serious? Finally he looked at me fully. And whatever was in his expression destroyed me. Because he looked terrified. Yeah, he admitted softly. I'm serious. Silence crashed between us. My brain genuinely couldn't process this. Richard. My best friend. The guy I'd spent years secretly wanting while convincing myself it could never happen. Now sitting across from me looking nervous because he wanted me too. I thought I was imagining things, he admitted. But then last night happened. My pulse jumped harder. The sleeping bag? He nodded slowly. When I woke up this morning holding you. He stopped himself halfway through the sentence. I didn't want to let go. That nearly killed me. I looked away quickly because my face was burning now. Richard noticed immediately. Wait, he said carefully. Why do you look like that? Like what? Like you're about to pass out. Because I was. Because this couldn't possibly be real. You're not messing with me? I asked quietly. His expression shifted instantly. Noel. I'm serious. I would never do that to you. The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. I swallowed hard. Then, before I could lose my nerve completely, I said the stupidest possible thing. You know I'm into guys, right? Richard blinked. Yeah. And you still? Yes. The answer came too fast. Too honest. His eyes stayed locked on mine. And suddenly all the tension from the last few months finally made sense. The touches. The staring. The weird moments. It wasn't one-sided. Holy shit. Richard leaned forward slightly. You seriously didn't notice? I let out one stunned laugh. Richard, you've dated women our entire friendship. I know. You talked about girls constantly. I know. You called Margot Robbie your future wife. She's objectively hot. I stared at him. He shrugged helplessly. Apparently you are too. That sentence hit me like a truck. Neither of us looked away. The air between us felt electric now. Completely different from before because now everything was out in the open. Every glance suddenly meant something. Every second of silence felt heavier. Richard rubbed his palms nervously against his jeans. I haven't told anyone this, he admitted quietly. You're literally the first person. Something about hearing that softened everything inside me. You don't have to figure it all out right now, I said carefully. I know. Another pause. Then he looked at me with this small, uncertain expression that I'd never seen from him before. But I know how I feel about you. My chest tightened painfully. Richard. I mean it. His voice dropped lower. I can't stop thinking about you. That was the exact moment my self-control completely failed me. Because before I could overthink it, I moved closer. Not much. Just enough. Richard's eyes flicked instantly to my mouth. The entire world went quiet. You have no idea, I admitted softly, how long I've wanted to hear that. Something shifted across his face. Relief. Shock. Maybe both. Wait, he breathed. Seriously? I nodded once. And Richard just stared at me like his brain had stopped functioning. You're kidding. No. You like me? I laughed quietly. You're really choosing now to become oblivious? Oh my God! He leaned back, dragging a hand down his face. You've got to be kidding me. You're the one who took 4 years to figure this out. Shut up, I'm having a crisis. I laughed harder this time. Mostly because I couldn't believe this was actually happening. Richard looked at me again. And slowly his expression softened into something warmer than I'd ever seen before. Come here. The words came out quiet. Instinctively. I moved before thinking. 1 second we were sitting across from each other. The next Richard's hand was around my wrist, pulling me closer beside him near the fire. Too close now. Our legs touched immediately. Neither of us moved away. His gaze stayed fixed on mine. You know what's crazy? He murmured. What? I've wanted to do this all day. My breath caught. Then slowly, carefully, Richard lifted his hand to my face. His fingers brushed lightly against my jaw. Gentle. Uncertain. Like he was still convincing himself this was real too. And then he kissed me. Soft at first. Tentative. But the second our mouths touched, something inside me completely unraveled. Because I'd imagined kissing Richard 100 different ways over the years. None of them came close to this. The kiss lasted maybe 3 seconds. Maybe 10. Honestly, it could have been an hour and I still wouldn't have known. All I knew was that Richard's hand was against my jaw, his mouth warm against mine, and every single thought in my head had completely disappeared. Then he pulled back suddenly. Not far. Just enough for both of us to breathe. We stared at each other in stunned silence. Richard looked wrecked already. Lips slightly parted. Eyes dark. Hand still resting against my face like he forgot to move it. Holy shit, he whispered. I laughed shakily. Yeah. Then he kissed me again. Harder this time. Like the hesitation finally snapped. My hand grabbed instinctively at his hoodie while he pulled me closer against him, and suddenly years of tension hit all at once. The kiss turned messy fast. Not sloppy. Just desperate. Like both of us were trying to make up for every moment we never crossed this line before. Richard kissed like he talked, slow at first, rougher when he got comfortable. And apparently once he got comfortable, I was completely screwed. His hand slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, fingers tangling lightly in my hair while he kissed me deeper. A quiet sound escaped me before I could stop it. Richard froze instantly. His forehead rested against mine while both of us breathed hard. You okay? He asked softly. The concern in his voice nearly melted me. Yeah, I whispered. Just overwhelmed. He laughed quietly under his breath. Me too. Neither of us moved away. The fire crackled nearby while cold evening air wrapped around us, but I barely felt any of it anymore. All I could focus on was him. Richard brushed his thumbs slowly along my neck. I seriously can't believe this is real. You and me both. He smiled a little at that. Then his expression shifted softer. You know what the worst part is? What? I almost said something months ago. I blinked. What? Richard groaned dramatically and leaned his head back. Yeah. Almost happened after your birthday. Richard. What? You're telling me this now? I panicked. I laughed despite myself. What stopped you? You called me bro immediately after I was literally thinking about kissing you. That's fair. It was devastating. I laughed harder. God. Seeing Richard like this felt surreal. Not guarded. Not joking to deflect everything. Just honest. And somehow that made him even more attractive, which honestly felt unfair at this point. The fire had burned lower by now, the air getting colder again. Richard looked toward the tent, then back at me. A very specific tension suddenly returned. "We should probably sleep soon," he said carefully. My heartbeat instantly picked up again. "Probably." Neither of us moved. Richard noticed immediately and smirked slightly. "You nervous again?" "No. Liar. I just know what sharing a sleeping bag means now." His expression changed at that. The teasing softened into something warmer. "Come on," he murmured quietly. We climbed into the tent slower this time. More aware. Every movement suddenly carried tension now. Richard unzipped the sleeping bag while I tried very hard not to stare at him. Failed immediately. "See?" he said without looking up. "You do stare. I hate you." "No, you don't." Unfortunately true. We settled into the sleeping bag facing each other this time, which somehow felt infinitely more intimate. The space between us was barely anything now. I could feel Richard's leg pressed against mine from ankle to thigh. Feel his breath. Feel the heat coming off him. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees again, but inside the tent everything felt quiet and suspended. Richard studied my face for a second, then smiled slightly. "You're blushing." "I'm in hell." "You're adorable." "That's worse." He laughed softly. Then, after a small pause, his expression shifted more serious. "You know we don't have to rush anything, right?" The gentleness in his voice caught me off guard. "I know. I mean it." His thumb brushed lightly against my wrist beneath the sleeping bag. "I don't want you feeling weird." "I don't feel weird." I hesitated. "Okay, maybe a little weird." "There. This is just—" I laughed nervously. "A lot." Richard nodded slowly. "Yeah." Another quiet pause settled between us. Then softly he admitted, "I've never done this before." I blinked. "Kissed a guy? Wanted one this badly?" That sentence hit me directly in the chest. Richard looked almost embarrassed after saying it. But before he could pull away emotionally again, I moved closer and kissed him first this time. His reaction was immediate. One hand slid firmly against my waist beneath the blanket while he kissed me back harder than before. The sleeping bag shifted around us as we instinctively moved closer together. Now my chest was pressed against his. His thigh slid between mine slightly. And suddenly everything felt dangerously intense. Richard pulled back just enough to breathe. "You have no idea," he murmured against my mouth, "how hard it's been not touching you." My brain nearly shut down. Then his hand moved slowly up my side beneath my hoodie. Warm fingers brushing skin for the first time. I inhaled sharply. Richard stopped immediately. "Too much?" "No." My voice came out embarrassingly weak. His eyes darkened instantly at hearing it. "Jesus Christ, Noel." "What?" "You're killing me." Then he kissed me again while his hand stayed against my waist under my hoodie, fingers spread gently against bare skin. Every touch felt amplified in the tiny space. Intimate. Careful. Like either of us fully knew what we were doing yet. At some point my leg tangled fully with his beneath the sleeping bag. Richard let out this low quiet sound against my mouth that made my stomach flip hard. The tension between us had changed now. Less nervous. More dangerous. Because now we both knew exactly what we wanted. And we were trying very hard not to completely lose control. At some point we stopped pretending we were going to sleep. The tension was way past that now. Richard lay there inches from me inside the sleeping bag, one hand still resting beneath my hoodie against my waist while we stared at each other in the dark like either of us could fully believe this was happening. "You know what's funny?" he murmured quietly. "What?" "I was terrified you'd freak out." I laughed softly. "I spent like 3 years trying not to accidentally flirt with you." His eyes widened slightly. 3 years? Maybe 4. Jesus, Noel. You were impossible not to like. Richard stared at me for a second after that. Then his expression softened into something that almost hurt to look at. No one's ever said that to me before. The honesty in his voice hit me hard. I reached up without thinking and brushed my fingers lightly along his jaw. Well, I said quietly, they should've. Richard kissed me immediately after that. Slow this time. Not desperate like before. Just close and warm and lingering. The kind of kiss that made everything around us disappear. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees while the last crackles of the fire faded somewhere beyond the tent. Inside, it was just us. Richard's hand slid carefully higher along my side beneath the hoodie, fingertips tracing slowly against my skin. Every touch felt intentional. Careful. Like he was memorizing me. I kissed him again before I could overthink how badly I wanted him. Richard smiled faintly against my mouth. You know, he whispered, I really like hearing you stop thinking. I always think. Not when I kiss you. That sent heat straight through me. He noticed immediately, too. You're blushing again. Shut up. Can't. It's cute. I groaned quietly and buried my face against his shoulder for half a second. Richard laughed softly and wrapped an arm around me properly this time, pulling me against his chest beneath the sleeping bag. And honestly, that almost destroyed me more than the kissing. Because suddenly this didn't just feel physical. It felt intimate. Real. I could hear his heartbeat under my cheek. Feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Neither of us spoke for a little while after that. We just stayed tangled together listening to the quiet sounds of the forest around us. Then Richard murmured softly into my hair. I don't want this to be some camping thing. I lifted my head slightly. What? I mean, he looked almost nervous again suddenly. I don't want us going back home pretending this never happened. My chest tightened instantly. You think I'd want that? I don't know. He laughed weakly. I'm kinda new to this whole emotionally vulnerable thing. I smiled despite myself. You're doing okay. Feels like I'm free-falling. Yeah, I admitted softly. Me too. Richard looked at me for a long second. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead lightly against mine. I really like you, Noel. Simple words. Still enough to completely undo me. I really like you too. He smiled after hearing that. Not his usual self-assured grin. Something smaller. Happier. And seeing it made my chest ache in the best way. Eventually the cold forced us deeper into the sleeping bag together. Now we were basically tangled completely together beneath the blankets, legs intertwined naturally while Richard absent-mindedly traced patterns against my back underneath my hoodie. You comfortable? He asked quietly. Very. Good. I tilted my head up slightly to look at him in the dim moonlight filtering through the tent. You know this is insane, right? Why? You went from straight best friend to clingy boyfriend in like 12 hours. Richard snorted. Boyfriend? The word hung there between us. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then slowly he smiled. You hate that word? No, I admitted quietly. Good. His arm tightened slightly around my waist. Because apparently he really was clingy now. Not that I minded. Honestly, I never wanted to leave this tent again. You know what I realized? Richard murmured sleepily after a while. What? You're always cold. I'm aware. And you steal blankets. I do not. You absolutely do. I'm literally sharing a sleeping bag with you right now. That feels generous. Richard laughed softly against my forehead. Then after a moment he kissed me there gently. Such a small thing. Still enough to make me melt completely against him. The exhaustion from the day finally started catching up to both of us after that. I could feel Richard growing sleepier by the minute from the way his movements slowed. Still he kept absent-mindedly touching me. Thumb brushing lightly along my side. Fingers tangled lazily with mine beneath the blanket. Like he needed constant reassurance I was still there. You falling asleep? I whispered. Maybe. You're drooling on me. Lies. I smiled into the darkness. Then quietly, before I could stop myself, I asked. So what happens when we go home? Richard opened his eyes fully at that. And for a second I saw something serious settle into his expression again. Then he answered without hesitation. We figure it out. The certainty in his voice calmed something inside me instantly. Richard brushed his nose lightly against mine. I'm not letting you disappear on me now. Good. I murmured. Good. A few minutes later he finally drifted off, holding me against his chest. And some time after that, listening to his heartbeat beneath my ear while rain started softly outside again. I fell asleep smiling for the first time in a very long time. The drive home felt completely different from the drive there. Not awkward. Just unreal. Richard kept reaching over to touch me like he physically couldn't stop himself now. A hand on my knee. Fingers brushing mine over the center console. At one point he casually stole my coffee again, except this time he leaned over and kissed my cheek afterward like that somehow made theft acceptable. You're obnoxious, I muttered. You like me. Unfortunately true. The weirdest part was how natural everything felt already. Like somewhere beneath all the panic and tension, this had been waiting to happen for a long time. We stopped once at a gas station halfway back. And apparently that's where Richard decided he no longer understood personal space. You need snacks? I asked while walking toward the store. He grabbed the back of my hoodie lightly to pull me closer beside him. I need you to stop walking away from me every 5 seconds. I stared at him. You've become clingy in under 24 hours. You love it. Again. Unfortunately true. Inside the store he followed me around like a giant golden retriever while I grabbed drinks and chips. At one point I caught him staring at me while I compared 2 candy bars. What? You're cute when you're focused. I nearly walked directly into a shelf. Richard laughed so hard he had to lean against the freezer section. Holy shit. He wheezed. You should have seen your face. You're actually evil. Maybe. Then quieter, while looking at me differently again. But you're still cute. That stupid warm feeling hit my chest all over again. By the time we got back on the road, rain had started lightly outside. Richard turned the music down lower while I drove. For a while either of us talked. Then softly he asked, You scared? I glanced over briefly. About what? Us. The honesty in his voice made me answer honestly too. A little. He nodded slowly. Me too. Another pause. Then Richard rested his hand on my thigh again. But I think I'm more scared of pretending this never happened. That settled something inside me immediately. I reached down and intertwined my fingers with his while driving. Richard looked down at our hands for a second like he still couldn't fully believe this was real. Then he smiled quietly to himself. And honestly, that smile alone was worth every confusing moment leading up to this. When we finally got back to the city, reality started creeping in again. Traffic. Buildings. Phones reconnecting to signal and exploding with notifications. Normal life waiting for us. Richard noticed me getting quieter as we pulled into my apartment parking lot. You okay? Yeah. You sure? I hesitated. Then admitted softly. I think I'm worried this is gonna feel different tomorrow. Richard looked genuinely confused. Different how? Like maybe this was just... I gestured vaguely. Camping brain. He stared at me for a second. Then immediately unbuckled his seatbelt. Before I could react, he leaned across the center console, grabbed my face gently, and kissed me hard enough to completely shut my brain off. When he pulled back, his forehead stayed against mine. Noel, he murmured quietly. I'm very into you. In cities too. I laughed helplessly. You're so stupid. And yet you're smiling. Damn him. I was. Neither of us moved right away. Then Richard looked toward my apartment building and sighed dramatically. So? You gonna invite me upstairs or what? I raised an eyebrow. You live 20 minutes away. Correct. You have your own apartment. Also correct. You're still not leaving, are you? Absolutely not. I laughed and grabbed my bag from the back seat. Clingy. Boyfriend behavior. The word hit me again. This time warmer. Lighter. Richard noticed my expression immediately. You still okay with that word? I looked at him for a second before answering. Yeah, I admitted softly. I think I really am. His entire face changed after hearing that. Like happiness hit him all at once. And seeing it made me feel something dangerously close to falling in love. Upstairs, everything somehow became even more surreal. Richard standing in my kitchen stealing water from my fridge. Richard sitting on my couch with his legs spread carelessly while looking completely at home already. Richard pulling me down beside him the second I sat down. You know, he murmured against my neck. I used to think about this couch a lot. I nearly choked. What? He laughed against my skin. You heard me. You're insane. You had no idea? Richard, I thought you were straight. Fair point. I turned slightly toward him on the couch. The teasing slowly faded after that. Now he was just looking at me again. Softly. Like he still couldn't believe this either. Then quietly he asked, You happy? The question caught me off guard. Because honestly, I couldn't remember the last time someone asked me that so sincerely. I looked at him for a second. Really looked at him. At the guy who had been my best friend for years. The guy who held me all night in a sleeping bag while rain hit the tent outside. The guy who kissed me beside a campfire and changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, I answered honestly. Yeah, I said softly. I really am. Richard smiled after hearing that. Then he pulled me against him, wrapped both arms around me like he had no intention of letting go, and kissed the top of my head. Outside, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. But all I could think about was how one broken sleeping bag somehow gave me everything I never thought I'd have.